Hi, Jan. I just talked your head off pre-recording for like 20 minutes. Um, for which I kind of apologize, but this is also kind of like, so you wrote a book, A Life Divided, about, I want to say it's a horrible story, and it is, but it's also your story, and I don't want to label that, but about your experience as a psychologist, married to a psychologist, discovering that your husband was living a double life. And I feel like when I was younger and would like go to a bar and people would find out I was a psychologist or going to be a psychologist, they'd assume I was a psychic. No. But so people, form these impressions of who we must be to be psychologists. And, I can imagine either verbally or non-verbally, when this first happened, some people might have been like, well, how didn't you know?
Oh,
Is that false or true?
yes, that's so true.
Yeah, I
That's
hate
very
those
true.
people for you. That's where I was going with it. Sorry. I hate those people for you, because my very minuscule story is like, 3 years after I gave birth to my son, I realized I had some serious postpartum shit. Like I used to open blinds to let me know it was morning and close them as a sign that it was nighttime because babies don't sleep. And it took me years to look back and go, I didn't get that, which is much smaller and different than what you went through. And I am so grateful you agreed to come on and to tell your story. And, and I also feel badly. I feel badly for what I imagine was like a subtle subconscious blame put on you.
And I did it to myself too.
Well, I mean, we're our own worst enemy, which is what I tell everyone. But yes, because we have degrees. And so.
Right. We're supposed to know everything.
I know. But in the book, you mentioned that you had the honor of meeting Albert Ellis.
Yes.
Okay, I know no one else knows, but I got to say this anyway. But I was trained in Hornian theory, and by
Karen Horney was one of my favorites coming up in the field. I loved her books. I loved how she was a pioneer.
She was a pioneer. She was that ass who used to go out drinking with the boys, and I love her. And technically I don't have my postdoc because I'm one class short, and it's in the city and I'm in the suburbs. But and I don't practice that way, but I think that way. And so talking to you, to me, after reading all this about you, feels sort of akin to getting to meet Albert Ellis, not because of theory, but because of survival. So thank you.
Yeah.
Where do we want to start? I'm in New York. You are not. And so, I mean, this all happened in Detroit. Detroit is a big city. It was a pretty big, dirty city in the 80s. By the way, so was New York. We had 18 detectives for like millions of people, and we have many unsolved murders. But in particular, you talk about jive.
Mixed jive, yeah.
Thank you, mixed jive. I'm winding it all together. How'd you meet Al?
I was working for him while he was writing a small book, and I was typing it. And he eventually, I was doing it on my own time. I was a student, and he eventually invited me in to be his receptionist as well. And I worked on the book while I was his receptionist. It came with a pay raise, so I said, sure. And then I moved downtown to be quite near the office and near where I went to school, which was right in the heart of the city.
I think you were 19, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
Okay. I told you numbers, not my strong point, but it's important. It's important. Like, you were 19. Al was already an established therapist.
He was 18 years older than me.
18 years older. Yeah. Which I think at 19 is kind of alluring. both
Mhm.
the intelligence and the experience and his ability to act as a supportive guide from what I got from your
Yeah,
book.
he was the first one in my life that really encouraged me to go to college and gave me the "you can do it" attitude. Nobody in my life had ever done that, and that includes school counselors, my parents, anybody. My parents were well-meaning, but their advice was just do what makes you happy. You don't have to go to college, and they had never been. And then my school counselor, you know, you got to remember this is back in the 60s, would basically say, well, you know, why don't you be a typist? Why don't you be a nurse? Why don't you be a teacher? And I didn't want to do any of those things.
Sure.
So I
Sure.
was lost, basically. I knew more what I did not want to do than what I did want to do when I left high school.
Which is funny because you briefly ended up being a typist, you know?
Yeah, I know. It is true, but I did it out of necessity.
And so that helped you. And so you were living in Detroit, in
Right.
a crappy, I hope my language doesn't bother you.
Mhm.
I have kids, they know not to swear in front of daddy or teachers. So, and they whisper swears to me, so it's okay. Um, uh, Again, A Life Divided is the book. I'm going to stop promoting it, but I want to promote it because as soon as Jan sent it to me, I was emailing her obnoxiously like every 3 days, and I think I finished it in a week maybe. It's Your writing is beautiful. Your
Thank you.
story is beautiful. I just don't want to use the word tragic, although it is. So you met this man. He was, and here we get to the fine line between fact and fiction. We knew he had been married before,
Right.
but what he told you and what you later came to find out the truth were two different
Two
things.
different things. Right. And it made sense if you knew his parents. I was never close with my in-laws. His father called himself a psychologist. He was bachelor's trained. He worked for the police department. Back then, of course, it was certification. It wasn't licensure, so it was a little more squishy in terms of what you could get away with. He was a very domineering, imposing person. I never quite cared for him. Really blusterly in his personality, imposing. And his mother was kind of like a teetotaler, and she was educated, but always superficial and formal. I never saw her in pants. We never would have a barbecue. It was always, you know, china and crystal and silver for dinner. And she just kept heaping food on our plates and then sat there and watched us eat and then was disappointed no matter how much we ate. And it was just, I felt like I was an interloper and I was never a member of the family. He
You
was their
weren't.
only child.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like. I also think only children are. Oof, I want to say weird, but that's awful. I just think that's not true. I think when you have a child and you see the love, if you can have another child and then a companion for your child. I mean, mine are 26 months apart, and thank God they can entertain or kill each other at their own
Mhm.
time. I So just for the audience, not only did I read Jan's book, A Life Divided, I also read. I had huge problems tracking it down because I don't Kindle or audiobook because I'm a visual learner. But there's a man named Lowell Caulfield who was I get the feeling he was a budding journalist, and he wrote a book called Masquerade, A True Story of Seduction, Compulsion, and Murder. And I will say the one thing that was nice combining these two was the description of Al's parents. Also, I am what I call a PTA whore, where I don't know how to turn down the parent teacher associations at my children's school. And so I end up getting stuck in multiple positions. And one of the most interesting, no, no, everything's interesting. But I was really struck by, also everything's awful. But for you, but I was really struck by the fact that Al's mother was very involved in PTA, and not just at a local level, but at a more
Mhm. She was the head of the PTA board.
right. We call that central council here, so I don't know what
Oh,
it's called, but no, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you leveled up, and so, and the great story that I read in both books about Al Senior was when this man without a degree, went and said that essentially, I'm paraphrasing, you can correct me, sexual deviants were the result of neurotic mothers at a PTA meeting.
Yeah.
I have been at some PTA meetings where I have heard absurd things. And I'm the first one to go, wait, what?
And that was back in the 50s that he said that.
Yeah. Also, my husband's a lawyer and a psychologist, and he used to, and he's, but he used to work extensively with like forensic, particularly sexual offenders or pedophiles. And so when I read that, I was like, I have so many questions here. It sounds like made up science, which now we're familiar with, but just that family must have been.
It wasn't comfortable. And especially when I came from a family that was so different. I came from a boisterous family with a lot of interactions with extended family. We had a great time. We told jokes and we weren't formal at all. We got together a lot. We laughed a lot. We argued a lot. I mean, in a way that was debating. That's what I mean by that. Everybody could have their own opinion and we'd laugh about it. And I mean, I was a kid growing up in this, so it was second nature to me by the time I was an adult. And to go from that to feeling like I was in a museum when I was at their house.
I want to clarify, you said argued a lot. That's debating. There's a difference between that and what you witnessed in Al's house.
There was no dissension in his house. Everybody was on the same page.
But now also it sounded like there was a lot of hostility.
It was unspoken. It was tension.
And so here you are. And so you meet him at 19, you start working for him, your role grows bigger, he's giving you more money. Fantastic. You need someone. I mean, no disrespect to your parents, who sound wonderful. I would never go home to recover from any illness to my parents. So which will become relevant, but you meet someone who actually believes in you, encourages you, supports you, and money doesn't appear to be an obstacle. It seems like he's got your greatest interests at heart.
It did.
I kind of want to ask you a stupid question. Stupid only because I'm sure you've been asked before. Was there an early sign, inkling, gut of maybe this isn't the man for me?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
Largely because I know you proposed to him.
I did. We'd been dating for about a year. And
he had just introduced you to Albert Ellis, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, he had. He took me to New York. I would
probably propose to him too.
I'd never been to New York before, and it was a beautiful weekend that we spent there. I felt like a queen the way I was treated, and it was the first time I'd ever flown. We stayed at the Plaza Hotel.
Beautiful, yeah.
And it was just a whole nother life that it was like something you'd see in a movie set. I'd never experienced anything like that. And he believed in me, and that made a huge impression on me. He was my backer, and he did. He that was genuine. He really felt strongly I could and I should succeed in graduate school. But I think the thing he did not count on was that I would go on to get a PhD and then go on to get a postdoctoral fellowship and then go on to disagree with him in the way he approached cases.
I think the postdoc
that was the final.
Right?
Yeah, right.
That was like the nail in the coffin. We spoke about this a little bit, but when I met my husband, I think what drew me in, besides the fact that he's kind of hot and really smart and funny, and our first date was like 12 hours, and I refused to go home with him because I'm a lady, and I think that was what did him in. And then I told him I was Jewish, and that was what did him in. But P.S. He's one of 4, and I'm the only actual Jew, so I win. But it was actually a feeling of like unconditional acceptance. Unconditional love is a fuzzy thing. I don't know. I'm still trying to wade through my cloudiness on unconditional love, but there was an unconditional acceptance that no matter what I had been through, the person that I am is a result of that. And moving forward, he would support me in being anything that I wanted to be.
Mhm.
And I told you before we started, that's sort of how I definitely found myself relating at various times. But I did not throw the book at him or accuse him of anything, which I think I deserve credit for. So you proposed, you were married, you were so much and are so much hotter. What I'm gonna go with were, because we can't actually judge by remains, but you were gorgeous. You are gorgeous, but like, I looked at the pictures like 8 times, but it's about finding that person that fills whatever need you're missing, I think.
Mhm. Yes,
And
I do too.
not judging your parents, just giving my own experience, my own perception. I feel like things were fine for the first 9 years.
They were, well, yes and no. They felt fine for the first 9 years, but I learned in retrospect, he was starting to be unfaithful, at least by the 3rd year.
Tell me about that, because I think I'm blanking.
When I had to, it's kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but when I had to go ID his body at the morgue, Detective Landeros told me that they knew it was him because they had previous fingerprints on him from an earlier arrest with a prostitute, dating back to what would have been our 3rd year of marriage.
I need you to help explain the Detroit scene, the prostitutes, there was a Chinese restaurant nearby. We were out. What is it called?
Chung's.
I could have made that up, so thank you. And you hated when he went there because it was a dangerous location, but it was quote unquote the best Chinese food. Listen, there are 2 restaurants people go to in my neighborhood and they claim they're the best. And frankly, they're mediocre. It's just that everyone goes there. So I might go to Chung's if it was, except I don't like Chinese food, but if we look back, obviously, and you know this from working with patients and probably obsessing over your own, history, if we look back, things were so much easier to see.
Yes, true.
So later you found out that it was that 3rd year of marriage when he first when he first got caught for stepping out.
Right. We don't know how soon it started.
Okay. I didn't know if you did. Well, is there like a correlation between something that was happening to you during that 3rd year?
Oh, let me see. Where was I? At that point in time, I would have been starting my master's degree.
So maybe. I'm maybeing with you. I mean, I feel like we're two shrinks just trying to dissect possibilities.
I had, there's question. One of the things I have had to accept is that there are many questions I'll never know the answer to because he's not here to ask. And data is hard to come by. This is back before the internet when this all unfolded. His mother was certainly no source of accurate information.
I know. What is her name again? I forget.
Gladys.
Yes.
Gladys Canty.
I think I voluntarily forgot because
she was not easy to be with. I mean, although she's one of these individuals that from the outside looking in, people would have been envious. Oh, she's a great person. And she was well educated. She was gracious. She was interested in my education. Those were all pluses.
Yeah.
But I found it effortful to be with her because everything was so formal all the time. And I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to overstep my bounds. I never called her mother. I never, because she's not a mother to me. My mom's a mother to me. And she wasn't like my mom. My mom was wonderful. So was my dad. I was lucky that way.
At my baby shower, when you're opening gifts or whatever, I opened a gift and It was chocolates. I'm not a big chocolate fan. White chocolate, fine. Just don't like. And then it said love mom and dad. And I was totally confused because this was not my parents' illegible handwriting. And it turned out at this exact public moment, my in-laws had chosen to go by mom and dad and never again. So so a part of me definitely felt this connection with like, we're trying to make things look pretty.
Right.
Mm,
Right.
And
The window display family.
that's a great way of putting it. So you were getting your master's, and then I don't want to tell your story for you because I'm just remembering it the way I read it, the way I put it all together. But so I feel like mono is the next.
Yeah, I got real sick in my postdoc. It was the third time I got mono. And each time
How is that possible? I thought you can get mono 3 times.
it never goes away once you have it. Once you have it, you have it.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of if your immune system gets weak enough, it pops back up. And
Gotcha.
it was, I mean, I was stressed out. I was in my postdoc. I was commuting. It was a tough population I worked with. It was the inner city of Detroit. I was working in a medical center alongside physicians, training them part-time in their bedside manner, as well as seeing patients myself. So there was a lot going on, and I just couldn't get past it this time. I was sicker all the time from it. And my physician finally said, look, either you go to the hospital or you go visit your parents in the desert, because they lived in Phoenix. And
Right, which is crazy that there's an option B. I mean,
I know. I thought, well, I'm not going to the hospital. Hell no. So I flew out. He got me a first class ticket, and I flew out there, and they took care of me. And that was the only time I felt that regressed as an adult. When I got off the flight, they were like, I was just a pile, and they put me to bed and let me moan for a few days. I had such a bad sore throat and so on. And after being there 10 days, I started to bounce out of it and got my appetite back, got my energy back. And this was around Christmas time. And eventually said, I'm ready to go back home. I had an open-ended ticket so I could go whenever I wanted. But I also was in my postdoc, and I didn't want the hours to be just added on to the end. I mean, the meter was ticking, right? So I wanted to get back as soon as I was physically able to do it, even though it was wonderful being in 60-degree temperature in the middle of winter. I didn't mind that a bit. But in my absence is when it was his birthday at that point, and his mother gave him $500. It was
his 50th
birthday. And she said to him, you're a big boy now. And she gave him $500 for his 50th birthday.
I mean, I feel like as like fans of analytic psychotherapy, we could look into that.
I know.
I mean, we don't have to, because half of my listeners will not understand that. But I just want you to know that that was seen. Like, I saw that, and
and when she directed, we sleep in the not master bedroom in our house. I thought that was weird.
Right. What was behind that?
She just wanted to keep him. It was kind of a parallel, I think, stepping backwards. She wanted to keep him infantilized in the same way he did me.
And that's probably where he learned it from. He was also an only child, and she called him either Buster or Bus. Which I don't know which is worse.
After Buster Brown, I know.
No, I got that reference. But still, did he look like Buster Brown?
Not at all, but she wanted him to. When he was a child, she dressed him like that and grew his hair to his shoulders like that.
Yeah, my almost 13-year-old doesn't care what he wears. He, like, my husband has to be like, you wore a gray shirt 2 days in a row. And I'm like, I don't give a, like, whereas my daughter has definite fashion and opinions. Mm-hmm. But it is weird. And as described I don't want to say weird, it doesn't sound constructive. And as described in your book, it's like he had to fit into this role. He doesn't seem to have a lot of experience he doesn't have a lot of interaction among children. And I don't want to overstep, but like, as we're talking now, I'm wondering if it ever occurred to you that maybe there was some sort of, I don't want to say abuse, but like near abuse or like adult to child inappropriateness
In
based
his
on,
family, you mean?
yes, like with him as the victim, based on how he interacted with people as needing to be the
I think what it was is he was always trying to prove himself. They sabotaged him. They put him down. His father, I did not ever hear this, but his father was had been known to berate him at his father's work setting if he showed up. And I don't know what it was all about. It was before I even knew him. So I think he walked a fine line of always trying to please, always trying to be better than he thought he was. And, you know, there's that when you grow up feeling like a phony, you're always trying to prove yourself. And I
I,
think that was a lot of what was going on with him.
okay,
And,
but what are your feelings about imposter syndrome? Because I hate that word. I also hate the word triggered, but that's because how do you deal with PTSD? You know,
right.
you relive it. But so you can have a different opinion than mine. I'm not going to insult you. But imposter syndrome, I feel like is self-esteem that we all struggle with. But in this specific case, I can see there being like room for that to be the issue.
Yeah, I think there was. Ironically, I think he really was a half decent psychologist. I'm not saying he was totally ineffective, but I think there was a part of him, you know, there's this old concept. I don't even know if they talk about it anymore. It's called the Peter principle, where if you surpass your self-esteem, you will sabotage. And that's what I think happened with him. You can only go as far as your self-esteem allows you to, and if you go past that, you will find a way to sabotage it and go backwards.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, the Peter principle. It was big years ago. I date myself, but at any rate, I think he became increasingly concerned that I would see through him too, because I had more education than him by at the end. And I always kept up to date on things. He had never done much of that. This is back before CEUs were required. So he'd fallen behind and he wasn't keeping up with continuing education. I was, and I would challenge him in a nice way, but I'd say, well, what about neurolinguistic data, or what about neuroplasticity? And he'd be looking like, I don't believe in that. And I'm like,
do you know that New York just instituted CEUs? Like,
no,
yeah,
I thought that was a long time ago.
I graduated in 2000, let's say 5 or 6. I forget when, you know, because of all the requirements, and my husband a year earlier. And this is in the middle of a pandemic, they take away our plastic bags. And then they mandate CEUs. I actually got my yoga teacher training during this, and so I'm probably going to be able to use part of that, but like we haven't had that. You know, I've been practicing for 2021 minus 2005 or 6 years, and we haven't had it. I mean, which I teach classes to kids online. I write for Psychology Today. I have kept up with things, but the mandate is the issue. But so it's, you know, yeah, I kind of wish I'd been grandfathered in, but I'll figure this out. But it is interesting the difference that time makes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think, yeah, that was an issue. And that's when things really came to the surface and fell apart, because I think he didn't know where to turn. I was no longer a admirer in the way I was years earlier. I no longer believed everything came out of his mouth in terms of psychology the way I did earlier. And keep in mind, I was coming into my prime physically and he wasn't. I think it all came to a head. And I don't think it's any coincidence at all that it all came to a head when we were going to join practices.
Yes.
That was our goal for years, but now it's on the threshold of it. It's a reality. And we had even gone so far as to pick out an office suite that had adjoining offices in it and decorate it. We hadn't 100% moved in, but we're really close to it. And that's when the shit hit the fan.
Well, it was that. It was his 50th birthday. Thank you for
Yeah.
swearing. So I feel like I'm not alone. You know, and so you had been suspicious. No, you had been
I've been
on
worried.
edge. Yes.
I knew something was, he was very preoccupied, a little irritable, which was different for him. He would spend an enormous amount of time soaking in the tub or being in front of the television and working 24/7, it seemed, and helping his mother, who was a widow by then. So that I had felt like I almost needed to make an appointment to see him, that I needed a control tower to keep track of his schedule.
Well, yeah, iPhones, too bad, but you know.
Yeah. So I felt squeezed out. I never suspected what truly was happening, but I just thought maybe it's his health, maybe
But
he's
you
not
were
feeling
also,
well.
which would make sense because of the age difference and what we think you were 32.
Yeah.
See that? Maybe I can use numbers. You were 32, he was 50 also. I should have remembered that. And so it makes sense to worry about his health.
And he was smoking too, and that didn't help his health.
Right. And then the thing that struck me, and I believe this is how you start your book, A Life Divided, is you're driving and you like pull off. You think you're being followed, and so you pull off into a side street, which is brilliant. My other podcast is Crimes of Long Island podcast, and I have now taught my daughter to memorize license plates as a result of my paranoia. So perhaps I would do that now. I wouldn't have done that 6 months ago, but you pull off because you have felt like you are being followed. There's other signs too, to be clear.
We'd had hang up calls.
And cigarettes,
and I found 3 cigarette butts outside. This is right after, I'd say 3-4 months after he had stopped smoking. I found cigarette butts beneath our kitchen window in a dry spell. In a rainy spell, in a rainy spell had just passed, and it was dry that day. I found them, and they looked like they were dry themselves. So I knew they could not have been there long because we just had a lot of rainfall previous to that. And I'm like, what the heck? And then it was just like these little red flags coming up that I couldn't piece together. The cigarette butts, and then, like you say, that was an issue, and he was working a lot of hours, and the hang-up calls, and then I was followed, and I just felt this sense of impending doom, but I couldn't put my finger on what the heck it was.
I mean, I'm terrified listening to you talk about, I got my first cell phone at like the year I graduated college, and so some of our listeners may not remember, like, we didn't have, well, some people had cell phones or power phones or whatever, but it wasn't the norm. And so if you're driving and something goes wrong, you're left to your own.
Yes. We did not have cell phones then at all. They were not even on the
my
horizon.
children don't understand maps. They kind of do, but like, they're like, imagine having to read a map while you're driving. I was like, it was tough. Or, having to print out, I had Google Maps, like having to print that out so you could follow it. But your quick reaction was, to figuring out what to do was impressive. And then I also it just occurred to me, the more danger, the more enmeshed he's getting himself in this dangerous life, this dangerous world, suddenly he quits cigarettes.
I know, let's ramp up the tension, right?
I mean,
well, I'd been bugging him to do it. I had been.
Well, I guess since he's seeing prostitutes, he can give you the cigarette.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the jive, the street
mixed jive.
I don't know why I can't remember it. It's probably because the only, like, I understand like drugs from here to here, and then everything else I'm like confused. Can you just explain? Street jive.
Mixed jive was something, as I understand it, was not common elsewhere. It was pretty common in Detroit. The active ingredient was rat poison because it gave you a jolt. And it was,
As well it should. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
And it made people like crack cocaine does. It makes them wired and frantic and paranoid. And of course, like any other substance, they do more and more to get the same effect. But the people that Al was hanging out with were not strictly drawn to mixed jive. They would do heroin, crack cocaine, whatever was available, quaaludes, well, you name it. And he would supply them with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have anxiety. I was diagnosed with adult ADHD. None of this is a secret. I'm perfectly proud of, the person I've become. The idea of doing anything that makes me more on edge feels awful to me. I've also never experienced that high, nor do I have any interest in it. But it sounds like neither did Al.
No, he'd never, to my knowledge, ever done drugs. No. He was addicted to caffeine, that's for sure.
I like whiskey, but I like the downers, the uppers. So I know I know what led up to you finding out, and then how you experienced it. So I'm gonna hand it over to you to tell me.
Okay. What happened was I got in this period of time where I'd recovered from the mono, and that was around Christmas time. And the following July, I was watching a 3-hour special on television. So I lost track of time. That's the importance of the 3-hour special. It was on AIDS. AIDS had just been discovered. There was no treatment for it. And it was a 3-hour special to raise funds for drought in Ethiopia.
I think it was Hands Across America. Am I remembering wrong?
It was Live Aid.
Live Aid, sorry. Yeah.
And all these stars, one after the other, It was simulcast in London. It was a big deal. And I was enthralled with it. I love music, especially from Detroit music. And I was sitting there watching it, and he was supposed to come home for dinner. And I lost track of time, and I looked up and it was dark. Now, it had been a rainy, stormy day, so that part wasn't totally shocking, but still it was like 10 o'clock. And he should have been home at 7. And again, no cell phones. So I'm trying to figure out what the heck. So I called his office, got the answering service. There was live people that answered the phones back in those days.
Thank God, because now you just have to press a number and no one gets
back. Right. And so I didn't know what else to do. So I called at midnight. I called my neighbor to take me down to the Fisher building. That's the building where he had his office.
Which, by the way, I have a little note somewhere in your book. I'm like, wow, I forget. Like, there is like a sexism, insecurity. I would call a neighbor too, but I'm just saying, like, to think back to being a young woman in that time, and I'm grateful for your neighbor because it was a dangerous area.
It was a dangerous area. To give you an idea how dangerous it was, foreign countries had suggested to their populations to fly over Detroit and not land there.
I mean,
The year that my husband was murdered, there were 790 official murders. And according to some of the detectives I spoke with, they said, really, it's closer to 900 this year, because so many went unreported.
My ears perked up in a positive way that you referred to him as your husband, because I can imagine there was a lot of anger possibly to work through.
Oh yeah, later. And so my husband didn't come home, which was not like him, and I did not want to go down to the Fisher building at night by myself at midnight, even though that's where I used to live, but I would always be in before dark.
Yes, but we get smarter as we get older. So.
Yeah. And we didn't find anything. Everything looked in order. And so I came home, and that was the end of that. The next morning, I went back to the substation for the Detroit Police Department that was literally across the street from the Fisher building. And they were very rude. They wouldn't help me. They basically said, well, go check the morgue. It hasn't been 24 hours. So
by the way, I'm so excited because I want everyone who ever loses a loved one to do what you did next.
Oh, yeah, I was pretty irritated with them. So I thought, well, okay, if it takes 24 hours, I haven't seen him in 24
Uh-huh.
hours. So I went to another police station and reported him
I'm
missing.
so excited. I read that and I have like big highlights. I'm like, brilliant. Why can't we all do that? Yeah.
But it didn't help. I mean, nothing came. It was just like he had disappeared, basically.
Well, he had.
And
Yeah.
he had. And so the days went by and I called my parents and I said, could you fly out? Because I don't know what the heck to do. I'm lost. And they were coming anyway for a visit. And I just asked them to come a few days earlier and they said, sure. So they did. And they were only at my house maybe 2 days, I think it was, when I got the phone call from a detective, Marlis Landeros, to come down to the headquarters for the Detroit Police Department. And my dad drove, we went down, and she took me up to the homicide division, which was like a big red flag. I went in, I spoke with her briefly, and then she took me into the room to see Inspector Gil Hill, who, by the way, was just finishing he had just finished his acting debut with Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop 1. He was Inspector Todd. And he's a lot like that figure in the movie. Very,
I meant to, I will, in fact, watch it. It's like a childhood, memory, but I also have to say, I love the way you describe and understand the people who were there to help you, guide you, steer you, and not always tell you what you wanted to hear.
but I trusted them and they treated me well. And they had very few words. And basically, Inspector Gilhill said, we don't have the proof yet, but we have every reason to believe that your husband's been murdered. And we don't have a body. If we did, we could do something more, but I wouldn't have you down there if I wasn't pretty sure. And oh, by the way, you should go home and check your finances because your husband's been spotted giving out lots and lots of cash for months down in the Cass Corridor, which is like the red light district of Detroit.
Now, wait, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but had you, I can't remember which I read it in, but like, I feel like they asked if you had been having financial difficulties.
And I said, I don't know. I said he would never let me touch the money. I mean,
Yeah.
when I was in school and he was handling all the bills, I didn't have any income. I was glad to let him do it. But as I finished and I was about to join his practice and have my own alongside, I wanted more involvement. And he just kept finding one excuse after another not to do that. Like, oh,
And
we'll
I
get to
don't,
it. We'll get to that, that maybe someday that's a good idea. And I'm like, no, not someday. Like when I paid the rent, he had me make the check out to him and he turned it into the Fisher building.
and
And I
by the
said,
way,
no,
yeah,
I want
yeah.
to write my own check from my own office and turn it into the leasing agent. What? No.
And I don't fault you for that. Because of our age difference, or my laziness, or my spoiledness, or whatever it was. Like my husband has always been in charge of bills, and then I realized, oh, I can't order another movie because he forgot to pay the bill, or Sprint will call me or whatnot. So I think that's a learning and growing experience when you start with an older man. And it seems like, thank God, one less thing I have to handle while I'm trying to.
That's right. That's how it felt at the time. Right.
Yeah. I mean,
I was driving long distance to commute, and how grad school is, it's demanding of
yeah.
every minute of your waking day. And so I was glad to have one less thing. I was trying to take care of this 3,900 square foot house, which is another whole project, which I didn't want anything to do with, but it was a beautiful house. But I thought, why do we have 6 bedrooms? There's 2 of us.
Which is an excellent question
Stupid.
Yeah.
But he had to have it. So I'm like, well, it's your money. If that's what you want, fine.
Right, but also he didn't really want kids for what.
No. And I was neutral on it at the time. I was okay with that because I thought I'm not going to be like a lot of women I saw and try to do both. I thought that's just too much.
It is. Yeah.
I want to wait and do it in order. I want to travel the world. I want to have my doctorate. I want to be financially secure. And then but I waited too long and actually ended up not being able to have children, but that was another whole story. So anyway, so that I was watching Live Aid and he didn't come home, and Jim Saris took me down there. Nothing came of it, reported him missing. Nothing came of that. My parents flew in. We went down to the Detroit headquarters, had that brief meeting with Gil Hill, and he sent me home. And I did look into my finances and I'm like, holy crap. Not only was I broke, we were 30,000 in debt in 1985 dollars, which
which
is closer.
I should have done the math, but yeah.
Yeah, it's inflation is staggering how much that money comes to. So we wait, and then the media descends, which is a whole nother nightmare because they were exceedingly rude and intrusive and invasive and insensitive.
Did you find out? So I tried to like reading both books, and I also was like stalked on the internet. I'm curious as to how much did you find out about his death from the media or from the police?
No, from the police.
Okay, I'm actually really grateful for that.
Yeah, me too. Because a week went by, and then Detective Marlis Landeros called again and asked us to come back. And by the way, I have to say something about her. She was instrumental in keeping my head together. She was an amazing woman. She was the first woman of color in any authority in the police department, which is still a struggle. I recently had a discussion with a man about that. He said his daughter's a captain in the police department and she's still struggling with it. So that's not going away. And I just immediately liked her. She was professional. She was sensitive to me. She was decisive. She knew when not to talk, when I could not take in another piece of information. And I felt like I could trust her, that she knew what she was doing. And so she called us back down. We went back down, and Inspector Gil Hill said, basically, your husband's in the morgue, or at least parts of him are, and we want you to identify him. I mean, he was a man of very few words.
I just had to like relax my shoulders because I know what's coming, and I'm in pain, anxiety, trauma for you, and not in like a demeaning way. I just want you to know how much your words affect me. Like I can feel it cringing up. So,
and Detective Landeros offered to drive us. It was only a few blocks, and I said okay. And my dad offered to do it for me, and she said no, that legally that's not going to happen because we need her to testify in court what she's seen.
Okay.
And so she has to see it. And she tried to describe what I was going to see before I went in, so I'd have a little bit of preparation. It smelled god awful in the morgue. This was in July. This is an old morgue. This was built in the 20s. And from talking with coroners today, there was not the equipment that they need today to keep fumes out. It reeked in there. It was dark. It was echoey. I remember that. And when she came for me to go to inside this area, I could not get up. It wasn't that I was willing. It was, I could not. I felt like my legs had turned to iron, like they were weighted down. And my dad picked me up under one arm and she picked me up under the other arm. And I just felt like a marionette going into the viewing booth. And they had his head there basically. And he had been buried for over about 8 days in a bog. That he had been buried, his identifiable body parts had been buried in northern Michigan in Petoskey on the property of the University of Michigan Biologics Station, which is a research facility set aside to study mosquitoes and other decay by having animals deposited there that are roadkill. So it's a perfect camouflage to.
It is, which seems very intellectual for these people, which we'll get to in part 2, these people, but I don't know if they lucked out or just someone rubbed together 2 brain cells.
I don't think they were stupid. I think they were drug crazy. And I think that Petoskey was the area where the informant lived, so he knew the area. So that's where he was taken to. And what happened was the man who helped bury his identifiable body parts turned state's evidence, and Al's unidentifiable body parts were just thrown on the freeway.
And that man was Frank
McMaster.
Thank you. And so you identified him.
Yes.
And then you had to go home.
Yeah. And the media was waiting outside the morgue. And they followed me home, and every turn I made, they were there and they would call. And then I started getting phone calls from like Oprah and other shows, and I did not want to speak with any of them. So once my dad was there, I said, would you take charge of the phone in the front door? And my mom took charge of the laundry and the cooking, and I was handling everything else. There was so many complications. I had no time to do anything but try to put out fires. There was financial worries.
Did you
I,
keep working?
I wasn't able to,
I,
not for a while. No,
I'm glad because
no.
um I know that what I do when things get bad is I throw myself into it, and I'm just grateful that you're smarter than I am and took the time.
Well, it was on the advice of my mentor. He said, you know, you
I
got,
want a mentor like your mentor.
he was wonderful.
I
Dr.
cried.
Rutledge.
I
He's
cried.
wonderful,
Yeah, I
wonderful guy.
cried because he does end up passing, and you described it in the book, and I actually cried out of both your loss and also wanting a mentor of my own.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy.
I want to stop us here because it seems like a good halfway point, because we haven't even gotten to the prostitutes. That
No.
should be like a tagline. So listeners, if you do want to hear the rest of it, please subscribe to my Patreon feed. It's really worth listening to, and I'm so grateful again.